The resume sat on my desk for 3 days before I recognized the name. Sarah Mitchell. She had taken back her maiden name after the divorce, but I knew the education history, the timeline of her career, the gap year she took in her 20s to work at a vineyard in Oregon. I knew because I had paid for half of it. I sat in my office on the 14th floor and looked at the city lights coming on across the skyline. And I realized that the woman who once told me I would never amount to anything without her was asking me for work. She did not know it was my company. The HR director had flagged her as a strong candidate for the marketing position. Her references were solid. Her portfolio was professional. I set the resume down and felt nothing except a small, distant curiosity about what I would do next. When Sarah left, she took the furniture, the wedding china, and most of my confidence. That was 7 years ago. I was 38 then, running a mid-level consulting firm that barely cleared expenses. I worked 16-hour days and came home to arguments about my absence, my priorities, my failure to understand what she needed. The word she used most was balance. I did not have it. I could not give it. She told me on a rainy Thursday in March that she was done, that I would never figure out how to live like a normal person, and that she deserved better. I did not argue. I moved into a rented room above a dry cleaner and learned how to cook eggs on a hot plate. The smell of steam and chemicals rose through the floor every morning. I took it as penance and kept working. Rebuilding took patience. I sold my share of the consulting firm to my partner and used the money to start fresh. I hired a business coach who taught me that success was not the same as exhaustion. I read books about systems and leverage. I stopped measuring my worth by how late I stayed at the office and started measuring it by how well the operation ran without me. It took 3 years to build the new firm into something sustainable. By year 5, we had grown to 40 employees. By year 7, we had 2 offices and a client list that included names people recognized. I learned balance not because Sarah had demanded it, but because I wanted to live past 50 without a heart attack. I went to the gym 3 mornings a week. I cooked real meals. I dated occasionally, though nothing stuck. I no longer thought about Sarah except when old friends asked if I had heard from her. I had not. The HR director was named Monica. She was competent and direct, and had been with me since the 2nd year. She knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon and asked if I had reviewed the finalists for the marketing role. I told her I had. She asked if I had any concerns. I looked at Sarah's resume again and then looked at Monica. I asked her what she thought. Monica said Sarah Mitchell had the strongest portfolio and the best cultural fit. She had worked at 3 agencies in the past 5 years and had a reputation for turning around underperforming teams. Her references called her disciplined and strategic. I nodded and asked Monica if she had checked the employment gaps. Monica said yes. There was a 6-month gap 2 years ago, but Sarah had explained it as a transitional period after leaving a toxic workplace. I asked what the starting salary would be. Monica told me. It was 40% less than what Sarah had earned at her last position. I told Monica to move her to the final interview round. I did not plan to be in the room when Sarah came in. I had a meeting scheduled with a client in Boston that day, and I intended to keep it. But the client rescheduled, and I found myself at my desk with nothing urgent on the calendar. Monica sent me a message asking if I wanted to sit in on the panel. I almost said no. Then I thought about the last thing Sarah had said to me before she walked out. She had stood in the doorway of our half-empty living room and looked at me with something close to pity. She said I was married to the work, and the work would never love me back. She said I would end up alone in an apartment somewhere, checking emails at midnight, and wondering where my life had gone. I remembered the particular flatness in her voice, as if she were stating a fact rather than offering an opinion. I told Monica I would attend the interview. Sarah arrived 10 minutes early. I watched her on the security monitor in the lobby, smoothing her blazer and checking her phone. She looked older. Her hair was shorter, cut just below her chin. She wore minimal jewelry and sensible heels. She looked like someone who had learned to present competence without flourish. I felt no resentment and no satisfaction. I felt the way you feel when you see an old photograph of yourself and realize the person in the image no longer exists. Monica greeted her in the lobby and brought her up. I waited in the conference room with 2 other managers. We had agreed that I would observe and take notes while they asked the questions. Sarah walked in and shook hands with everyone. When she reached me, she paused for half a second. Her eyes moved across my face, searching for recognition. I extended my hand and introduced myself by my first name. She smiled politely and said it was nice to meet me. She did not know who I was. The interview lasted 40 minutes. Sarah answered every question with precision. She spoke about her approach to integrated campaigns and how she had restructured a failing team at her last position. She spoke about the importance of data and creativity working in tandem. She did not use jargon. She did not oversell. When one of the managers asked her why she had left her previous role, she said the company had gone through layoffs and her department had been eliminated. She said it with no bitterness, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone who understood that business was business. I took notes and watched her hands. She still twisted her ring finger when she was thinking. She no longer wore a ring. I asked her one question near the end. I asked her what she did to maintain balance when the work became overwhelming. She looked at me directly and said she had learned the hard way that balance was not something you found. It was something you built. She said it required boundaries and discipline and the willingness to disappoint people sometimes. She said it was the hardest lesson of her career. I nodded and wrote nothing. After she left, the managers discussed her candidacy. Both of them wanted to hire her. Monica said she was the best fit by a wide margin. I asked if there were any red flags. Monica said no. I asked if we should run a second reference check. Monica looked at me carefully and asked if I had concerns. I said no. I told her to extend an offer. Monica asked if I wanted to meet with Sarah again before finalizing. I said that would not be necessary. I told Monica to assign Sarah to the mid-market team under Daniel, one of our senior managers. I said I wanted her to have a strong supervisor and a clear path for growth. Monica said she would handle it. I thanked her and went back to my office. I stood at the window and watched the traffic crawl along the avenue below. I thought about the man I had been 7 years ago, exhausted and defensive and convinced that suffering was the same as commitment. I thought about the man I was now, standing in an office I had built through patience and structure. I thought about Sarah sitting in her car somewhere, relieved to have a new position after months of searching. I felt no need to correct her ignorance. I felt no need to reveal myself. I had already won, and she would never know it. Sarah started 3 weeks later. I saw her once in the break room during her first week. She was making coffee and talking to one of the junior designers. She looked comfortable. She did not see me. I kept my distance. Daniel reported that she was integrating well and had already identified inefficiencies in the campaign workflow. I told him to give her room to lead and to copy me on her progress reports. I read every report. Her insights were sharp. She had a gift for seeing patterns and translating them into action. She reminded people of deadlines without sounding punitive. She asked questions that exposed weak assumptions. Within a month, Daniel told me she was the strongest hire he had supervised in 2 years. I told him to make sure she felt valued. I did not explain why. I kept my routines. I went to the gym. I cooked dinner at home 4 nights a week. I took a weekend trip to the coast and walked along the empty beaches, listening to the gulls and the surf. I thought about Sarah once or twice, but only in passing. She was an employee now. She was good at her job. That was all she needed to be. I had hired her because she was qualified, and I had placed her in a position where she could succeed. I had done it without announcing myself, and without extracting any acknowledgement. It was enough. 3 months in, Sarah submitted a proposal for a new client pitch. It was ambitious and tightly argued. She suggested a partnership model that would allow us to take on larger projects without overextending our core team. Daniel forwarded it to me with a note saying it was one of the best strategic documents he had seen from a mid-level hire. I read it twice. It was sound. I scheduled a meeting with Sarah and Daniel to discuss implementation. It was the first time I would speak to her directly since the interview. The meeting took place on a Wednesday morning. I arrived first and set my notebook on the table. Sarah came in with Daniel a few minutes later. She greeted me the way she greeted everyone, polite and professional. I asked her to walk me through the proposal. She did. She used the whiteboard. She drew diagrams. She anticipated my questions before I asked them. I listened and took notes. At one point she paused and asked if I had concerns. I told her the model was strong, but that we needed to build in safeguards around scope creep and client dependency. She nodded and said she had thought about that. She suggested we draft clear contract language and limit the pilot to 2 clients. I agreed. I told her to move forward and to keep me updated. She thanked me. I told her the thanks were unnecessary. I said she had done the work. I said that was all I required. She looked at me for a moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of recognition, but it passed. She left the room with Daniel, and I sat alone for a few minutes, looking at the diagrams on the whiteboard. I erased them before I left. The pilot succeeded. Sarah managed both client relationships with precision and brought in revenue that exceeded our projections by 18%. Daniel submitted a promotion request. I approved it. Sarah moved into a senior role with a 12% raise and a small team of her own. She sent me a thank you email. It was brief and professional. She said she appreciated the opportunity and looked forward to contributing at a higher level. I wrote back and told her the promotion was earned. I did not add anything personal. I did not need to. 6 months after she started, the company held a quarterly all-hands meeting. I gave a short address about our growth and our goals. I talked about the importance of sustainable practices and the difference between activity and impact. I mentioned balance. I did not look at Sarah when I said it, but I felt her attention. After the meeting, employees mingled in the common area. I stayed for a few minutes and then moved toward the exit. Sarah intercepted me near the door. She said she wanted to thank me for the culture I had built. She said it was the first place she had worked where people were encouraged to have lives outside the office. She said it made a difference. I told her I was glad to hear it. I asked her if she felt supported. She said yes. She said Daniel was an excellent manager and that the team respected the boundaries we had established. She paused and then asked if I had always run companies this way. I told her no. I told her I had learned the hard way. She nodded slowly and said that was the only way anyone ever learned anything that mattered. I agreed. I told her to have a good evening. She thanked me again and walked back toward the group. I left through the side door and went home. I thought about telling her. There were moments when it seemed absurd to maintain the silence. She worked for me. She reported on projects I oversaw. She sent me emails and sat in meetings where I made decisions that shaped her work. But every time I considered revealing myself, I realized it would serve no purpose except to satisfy my own ego. She did not need to know. The knowledge would not improve her performance or clarify anything meaningful. It would only create awkwardness and force a reckoning with a past that no longer defined either of us. I had built something without her. She had found stability in a place I had created. That symmetry was enough. A year into her tenure, Sarah's team won a major contract. It was a campaign for a national retailer, the kind of account that elevated a firm's reputation. She led the pitch and closed the deal. Daniel called me the day the contract was signed and said Sarah had been flawless. I told him to take the team out for dinner and to expense it. I sent Sarah a congratulatory email. She responded with gratitude and said the win belonged to the whole team. I told her the team had succeeded because she had led them well. She wrote back and said that meant a lot coming from me. I closed the email and went back to work. The divorce had taught me that you cannot control how people see you. Sarah had seen me as weak, as unbalanced, as incapable of living a full life. She had been wrong, but her wrongness did not require correction. I had proven her wrong by becoming someone who no longer needed her validation. I had built a company that operated with discipline and humanity. I had hired her because she was good at her work, and I had given her the chance to succeed on her own terms. She had taken that chance and earned every promotion and every word of praise. She had done it without knowing I was watching. That was the point. I thought about what she had said in the interview, that balance was something you built. She had been right. I had built it in the years after she left, not because I wanted to prove her wrong, but because I wanted to survive. I had learned to separate my worth from my hours. I had learned to trust other people to carry weight. I had learned that success was not a trophy you held, but a system you maintained. Sarah had helped teach me that, though not in the way she intended. Her departure had forced me to choose between collapse and reconstruction. I had chosen reconstruction. The man she had pitied no longer existed. The man who stood in his place had nothing to prove and no need for revenge. 18 months in, Sarah asked to meet with me privately. She scheduled it through my assistant. I agreed. She came to my office on a Friday afternoon. I offered her a seat. She sat and folded her hands in her lap. She looked nervous. I asked her what was on her mind. She said she had been thinking about something for a while and wanted to share it. I told her I was listening. She said she had noticed that I spoke about balance and sustainability with a specificity that suggested personal experience. She said most executives talked about culture in abstract terms, but I spoke about it the way someone spoke about survival. She asked if I had been through something difficult. I told her I had. She nodded and said she thought so. She said it showed in the way I ran the company. She said I had created a place where people could do excellent work without destroying themselves. She said that was rare. I thanked her. She paused and then asked if I had rebuilt after something. I told her I had rebuilt after a failure. She asked if I minded sharing what kind of failure. I told her a personal one. I said I had been married once and that I had not understood how to balance the work with the relationship. I said the marriage had ended, and I had learned from it. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said she had been married once too. She said her husband had worked all the time, and that she had tried to make him see what he was losing. She said he had not listened. She said she had walked away and spent years regretting how she had handled it. She said she had been too harsh. I asked her if she had stayed in touch with him. She said no. She said she did not even know where he was. I told her that sometimes distance was necessary. I told her that people had to find their own way. She agreed. She thanked me for listening. I told her it was no trouble. She left, and I sat in my office and looked at the empty chair where she had been. I never told her. I never saw the need. She continued to excel. Her team grew. She was promoted again. She bought a small house outside the city and posted a picture of it on the company's internal board. People congratulated her. I added my congratulations as well. She thanked me in person the next time I saw her in the hallway. She said she never thought she would own a home again after losing the last one. I told her I was glad things had worked out. She smiled and said she was too. She said she had been lucky to find a place where she could grow. I told her luck had nothing to do with it. I told her she had earned every bit of it. She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Then she thanked me and walked away. 2 years into her tenure, I received an email from Sarah late on a Sunday night. The subject line said, "Gratitude." I opened it. She wrote that she had been thinking about her career and the places she had worked, and she wanted me to know that this company had restored her faith in leadership. She said I had created something that valued people without sacrificing results. She said she had worked for leaders who saw employees as expendable and leaders who prioritized feelings over accountability, but she had never worked for someone who balanced both so well. She said it had made her a better professional and a better person. She said she hoped I knew how much it mattered. I read the email twice. I wrote back and told her that her success was a reflection of her own discipline and talent. I told her I had simply provided the structure. I told her the rest was hers. She wrote back within minutes. She said thank you. She said she meant it. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark of my living room, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I thought about the woman who had told me I would end up alone and bitter, checking emails at midnight in an empty apartment. I thought about the woman who had just sent me an email at night, thanking me for building a place where she could thrive. I thought about the fact that she did not know they were the same person I had once shared a life with. I felt no triumph. I felt no vindication. I felt a calm, quiet satisfaction that required no witness and no proclamation. Balance was something you built. Sarah had said it in the interview, and she had been right. I had built it in the ruins of what I lost. I had built it without her, and then given her a place within it. She had thrived without knowing the foundation she stood on. That was enough. That was everything. I went to bed and slept without dreaming. The next morning I went to the gym, cooked breakfast, and arrived at the office by 8. Sarah was already there, working on a presentation. She waved when she saw me. I waved back. We went about our work. The city moved around us, indifferent and constant, and I felt at peace with every choice I had made. 3 years in, the company won an industry award for workplace culture. I was invited to speak at the ceremony. I accepted. The event was held in a hotel ballroom downtown. I wore a suit I had bought 2 years prior and arrived early. Sarah was there with her team. She had been nominated for a Leadership Recognition Award in her category. She won. I watched her walk to the stage and accept the small glass trophy. She gave a short speech about the importance of environments that trusted their people. She thanked Daniel. She thanked her team. She thanked the company. She did not mention me specifically, but she looked in my direction when she talked about leadership that led by example. I nodded once. She returned to her seat. When it was my turn to speak, I talked about the difference between success and sustainability. I talked about the lessons I had learned from failure. I did not mention Sarah. I did not need to. The audience applauded politely, and I left the stage. After the ceremony, people gathered for cocktails. I stayed for one drink and then made my way toward the exit. Sarah caught me at the coat check. She was holding her award. She said she wanted to thank me personally. I told her congratulations were in order, not thanks. She said she had been thinking about something I had said in my speech. She said I had mentioned learning from failure, and she wanted me to know that she had learned from failure too. She said she had made mistakes in her past that had cost her things she valued. She said working here had taught her that you could rebuild and that rebuilding was not the same as starting over. She said it was about becoming someone better. I told her I agreed. She smiled and said she was grateful. I told her to enjoy the evening. She thanked me one last time and walked back toward her team. I collected my coat and left the hotel. The night air was cool and sharp. I walked 3 blocks before hailing a cab. I thought about the man I had been and the man I had become. I thought about Sarah and the strange, invisible architecture of our shared history. I thought about how justice did not always announce itself, how sometimes it arrived quietly in the form of a second chance neither person knew they were giving. I went home and slept deeply. The work continued. The balance held. And that was all I had ever wanted.